Yeah, so basically, let's get started. So basically, this pod is about what is British culture. So where it's something I've been thinking about recently, about what makes us different from other countries, basically. And 2 years ago, I lived with a bunch of Americans, right? And the way that they interacted with their friends was so different. Like they don't take the piss like we do, and like that's the way that we show, that we like our mates. Basically, is that we just rip into one another, and then we see how much you can handle, and then we adjust accordingly, right? Whereas the Americans don't really do that. They seek to just build their friends up, and they're all about positivity, which is nice for a short period of time, but after a while, it gets a little bit grating when you can't just make fun of one another. So, and there are definitely other things about British culture which we can get into as well.
I mean, you made it seem like it was those specific people. So, if you mean it in a more
I mean, in a
general
more
way,
broad way, like Americans they seem to be all about building one another up, from the people that I've interacted with. Whereas a Brit, within a couple of seconds of meeting somebody, will start to be ripping into them. Like I've had those, conversations with people I've met on nights out where I'm just immediately ripping into them and they're ripping into me. Like, that's how we made mates, is just from you bullying me for a year, basically.
yeah. Well, that's kind of like the personality being shown there, isn't it? If you're
True.
standing there like, "Oh, good job, well done," you're not really going to get very far, in my opinion. I don't know.
Oh, fucking hell. I find it so cringe as well when everyone's all fake positive all the time. Like, yeah, go on, guys. You wanna be like, you're not a real person. Act real, please.
I've got a funny story about that actually.
Oh yeah.
Before we get too into it, so when I swam more regularly than I do now, um, I swam with quite a few well, I was going to say high end, but professional athletes who finaled at World Champs and Olympics and whatnot. One of those guys was American. He came and did a few sessions with us, and we were just doing some sprint work. And one of those sprint work um, sets, we were literally climbing out and we're just out of breath, completely
Mm.
out of breath. So you just come out, and when you say you come out, you roll out of the pool.
Crawl
And
out.
yeah, you try to just going to the side of the ladder. It's like, help. And as you get out, he's like, "Go on, guys, good job." And I remember thinking, like, when he was shouting, I was like, "Shut up, you fucking loud American twat." And it's like that kind of positive, loud, and overly excited, that kind of image that most Americans give themselves. I'm sure it's not all, because it's just that picture that it's like the Americans probably have a stereotype that we fucking
Have
have
horrible
Downton
teeth.
Abbey left, right, and centre everyone. So
Yeah, and also that seems to be like the popular culture way to act, whereas British culture, and to an extent probably Australian culture as well, seems to be a lot more down to earth and don't get above your level, basically. And that's a good thing, because it means that you don't have an ego as much, and so you don't act like a dick. Like there
yeah,
aren't as many British YouTubers who I've come across who are arseholes. Whereas when you think about American YouTubers that are arseholes, there's so many of them.
but is that because there's more American YouTubers? Because I can, off the top of my
Perhaps
head, I can think of quite a few English YouTubers who are twats.
that's true. Actually, you've got a few that we're more aware
But
of, but to a greater extent.
I think I understand where you're coming from, though.
Mm.
It is a sense of personality, though, quite a bit of it, where in British culture, like you said, it is adjusting, having that personality show rather than go in and be really positive, because
Mm.
we are positive, I guess, just not to that same level. We'll complain about a lot of things as well, but we'll make fun out of it whilst complaining. We're not just going to be like, "Oh, this is shit, the weather's shit." We're just going to be like, oh, the weather's fucking brilliant. Um, I don't know if the Americans would do that or any other culture would do that, but I think with British culture, you've got quite a lot of uh, I was going to say kindness, but that's probably not the right word. Maybe politeness is the better word,
Yeah,
where we would be queuing up and we would always like have that fake smile. You know, when you walk past a stranger, like whilst walking a dog, and it's just that.
yeah, yeah. You do this.
Like, you're not
I
smiling, but you're kind of just pushing your mouth forward a little bit and puffing it.
mm, just to know that you
um,
acknowledge them somehow.
yeah, and people like that around the world. That, like, you know, when they come to Britain, they get that kind of polite culture, but
Mm,
it's from having been in a culture where it's not just British. I can safely say that other cultures that I've come from will be straight up front to your face, whereas the British culture won't. They'll do that smile, turn around, and slaughter you behind your back. And be it again, not everyone, but yeah, that's another thing.
that's very true. Actually, there's definitely room for Brits where you don't necessarily know where you stand with some people. I know I've had this in my life, um, and whereas with I got to live in Germany for a while, and I knew pretty much straight away where I stood with people. So it's good in a sense of, it's nice to be polite to one another. Obviously, we don't want to be dicks the whole time, but you sometimes lose track of where you actually stand with people because people are always hiding their true feelings or motives. Maybe not always, but you do
Yeah,
get people.
yeah, that was one of the hardest things that I had to basically adjust to. I've come from a culture where it was basically a straightforward
Mm,
Eastern European. You go out drinking with that person. If you go out drinking with them, then they're your best mate. Like, that's it. Or from a culture which is just straightforward in your face. If they don't like you, they'll just tell you straight up front. Well, they probably won't tell you straight up front, but you'll know. You'll get hints that they're not your biggest of fans. But here, I remember the first few years, I was thinking, oh, everyone's really nice, everyone must really like me. But I ended up actually being stabbed in the back quite a few times. And you just learn
mm.
and you just get on with it. So there is more politeness on the front, but behind the scenes, there's more bitchiness, I think.
Exactly, which is a little bit sad when you've got men acting like bitchy little girls, and you're like, no, men should be willing to be confrontational and all that, even if it doesn't necessarily look like the most polite thing to do or whatever. Surely,
I'm not sure if confrontation was the right
sure,
way
yeah,
to say
but
it.
more direct.
Yeah, like, you got to be nice to everyone. You know, it's one of those things that it's an etiquette that's unwritten. So
Mm,
um, if you're not nice to someone because of something they did, you should say, well, look, you've done that or whatever. And I think there is, you know, as there is in any culture, there's absolute bellends everywhere. So we're not going to talk about them. We're just going to talk about this stereotype that, quote unquote, we're talking about.
yeah, exactly. There's a lot of enforced politeness in our culture where when I lived in Germany, as I walked through this big door, I would hold a door open for somebody, and they would be like, "Oh my God, thank you, you British, you're amazing." And I'm like, "What? I just held the door as I walked through it. It's not that hard." And they're like,
Mm.
"Oh my God, the British politeness," and that's, in Germany they just let it slam shut on you. You're like, wow.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I definitely agree with you. I had situations where I went back to visit family and whatnot, to Israel, and I held doors for people, and they just looked at me really weirdly, like, "Are you trying to hit on us?" I was like, "You were literally 3 seconds behind me. What's
Mm.
gonna stop me, or how's it gonna harm me? Waiting for 3 seconds, holding the door, waiting for you to do it. It's just gonna make it easier for you." And they were just like, "That's just weird." I was like, it's not. It's just genuine politeness.
Exactly,
So,
you're just doing a kind act for somebody.
so yeah, but like, I feel like only really us have it.
It's something I was talking about with this girl I work with who's from Portugal, and she talks about, we were talking about how when we get drunk and things, that Brits tend to have a lot more fights. You tend to see bald men having fights in Magaluf and whatever because they're drunk in the sun or whatever. And she brought up this brilliant idea for me where, you know, we have this culture of enforced politeness the whole time, where you constantly have to say your pleases and your thank yous, and you constantly have to be very nice to people. And then when you're drunk, you know, you lose your inhibitions anyway, and you start to become, you know, people start to let that out more. So she has the theory that because we're a lot more restricted in other cultures, and we have to be a lot more, we can't be as direct. When we are drunk, we become more direct, and that pisses people off. And so that's where those fights can come from, basically.
I mean, that stereotype went from the Americans seeing us as James Bond
Yeah,
to the Europeans seeing us as the
exactly.
Danny Dyers trying to punch everyone's teeth out. Um,
But I do think she has a point, though.
yes and no. I feel like
Hmm.
the two stereotypes are completely different spectrums of classes and just anything really. So
True.
I think those people who fight full stop anywhere in the world are brainless, and if they
Hmm.
do that, they're not really doing it for the right reasons, because pretty much anything can be sorted with words. Um, so those people who go and fight, they are on holiday, they're lads, they're cool. I don't know what the reason is, but um, it's usually over football or some kind of stupid sport that shouldn't really be fighting over,
Mm.
where they think that England's the best team in the world, which they are not, evidently, and that pisses them off because maybe other rival fans give them some stick and they don't like that. I don't know. I don't. I've never been in that situation, so I can't really tell how others feel to want to hurt someone because of who they support or where they come from.
Mm. It is interesting, though, how in our culture you put two people, two football fans who support different teams. You know, you put different T-shirts on them, and they're willing to just go at one another. I just find that so bizarre.
It's strange considering in the World Cup and Euros, all the fans sit together in a mixture.
Yeah,
So there's no fights there. So how does that happen when you've got so many fights happening? You've got however many stories of that, maybe not recently, but definitely about 10 years ago, when the English fans used to go over to Italy, especially when, like, I remember it was Chelsea playing against Juventus, as a Liverpool playing against like Roma, Man United playing against Napoli or AC Milan or something like that. And you always saw these videos of these English fans going over, just battering these restaurants against all these Italians, and the Italians are just there like, whoa, just like completely teasing the shit out of them, which is not helping the
mm,
situation. But
no,
yeah, you don't hear the best of stories about those hooligans who go there. But then again, they go there for the fight. They don't go there to enjoy the games.
exactly. They go there for the experience of having that confrontation, and you just think, dude, just join a boxing gym, join some kind of fighting club thing where you can get that out. Why? Why do you need to do this? It's about football.
Well, people will, if anyone listens to this podcast, people will probably get pissed off by this statement, but they should probably join a little ballet club because they're little girls who need to get their priorities right. And I'm not in any form of way trying to say that little girls do ballet, because I'm sure there's very strong men who do ballet as well. But we're talking about stereotypes in this podcast, so just go along with it.
Exactly, yeah. But you know that you do make a decent point that they are just like little children. And once they get their feelings hurt, they just start lashing out at people.
Don't get me wrong, when I've had a few drinks and I'm very merry, I'll get
Oh
quite
yeah,
angry. And, I'm not saying I'm going to go punch someone, but I'll definitely go grab someone and try and hug them, give them proper tough love. But maybe it's just me as a person who wants to show more love than anger when I'm angry. I don't know. When I'm drunk, not
yeah.
angry.
I'm a very silly drunk. You've seen that, but yeah, people seem to express it in really different ways, and you know that's a really strange one. But it's interesting, those two different ends of the of the British spectrum coming back to, I guess, the higher end of the British spectrum, the one that has money. What I find very interesting between British money and American money, like people who have lots of money, is that the Americans are much more willing to just flaunt it and show off that they have money, whereas the Brits, you're not really as keen to do that.
Do you know why?
Go on.
So you would know exactly what I'm talking about. I'm not going to say who said this, but you imagine a Lamborghini driving by in a street in London, and what would people say? What do you think? Like in a stereotypical way, what would people say? Would they be like, "Oh, this is so cool," or would you say, "Oh, what fucking mug
Oh yeah,
driving
people
that
say,
car around here"? In America, with
yeah,
that positivity, someone drives
yeah,
by and they're like, "Oh my god, this is insane, dude! This is
yeah,
amazing!" And it's one of those things where it's good that you're positive, but also the
yeah,
Brits are fucking mugs for not allowing people who can afford to show off those things and enjoy those things. I
mm,
personally wouldn't go buy a Lamborghini because one, I can't afford it, and two, I just driving that thing would drive me insane because I would be worried about curbing it or using it wrong or whatever, just
mm,
damaging it. So people living to their means, I do understand what you're saying with them being less showy off in the UK. But I also think, again, very stereotypical. So I'm not saying this is all across for everyone, but Brits tend to invest their money into things that will return more money, if that makes sense.
that's okay, yeah,
So with the Americans, they'll go and spunk out money on a Lamborghini or, a massive. Um,
the next big shiny thing that they can get, whatever it may be, the new
yeah,
iPhone.
yeah, which is not going to return their money. Whereas Brits,
Mm,
we have a big culture of property investments where we'll go put money into a property, redo it up, and then hopefully that will increase the value of the house. And that's why I'm sure it is across like that in the rest of the world, but here, especially in the UK, the property market is one of the biggest pillars in the economy, just purely for that reason.
mm,
So, where you've got countries like Greece and Portugal and Turkey and many, many more countries where they're mostly reliant on tourism, we don't have that. We've got foreign investors even coming here and investing into our properties in the UK. So this is going off on a tangent a little bit. All I'm
mm,
saying is the Brits love to, again, being very generalistic, but
mm.
spend their money into something that they think will add value rather than make them look good.
Hmm. Yeah, but then that's a good point, but also carrying on from that, once you have enough disposable income to the point where you can afford those things, even still, like my parents have done all right for themselves, and they're not really willing to go out and buy these flashy things. They don't dress too flashy. The culture, generally speaking, in terms of fashion, cars, you look at properties as well, there's nothing too flashy about it necessarily. It's about um I was going to say modesty, but that's maybe not the right word.
But
um
also, um, I mean, from this is another theory. I'm not saying it's right.
yeah,
Um, and this whole podcast is a whole theory. So I'm going to stop saying it's a theory. So and I'm just going to say
yeah, yeah.
what's on my mind from
Mm,
now on. But where Americans are a little bit more selfish, and they've earned their hard-earned money somewhere or another. And do you think that they will say to themselves, "Well, actually, I earned it, so I'm going to go and buy myself a very fancy, nice car"? But people here would say, "Well, actually, yeah, I earned it, but I'm going to be less selfish, and I'm going to try and save that money so my kids and my grandkids can have something nicer that I can save and then help them in the future because I'm already quite nicely set up."
well, that's a very broad idea. So I think there will be, I think as a proportion of the population, you will potentially find more Americans who will subscribe to the first thing that you said than the second. And you will find more Brits who will subscribe to the second thing about setting their family up and things for life rather than buying the flashy thing now. But I still think, there are going to be Americans who will be smart with their money and will invest it in things. But you're right that there are going to be less of them, I think. I do agree with that.
It's just one of those things that we would need to carry out a survey. So I don't fancy going to America right now or anytime soon.
I really don't. It seems to be, and to that point as well, it seems to be a much more individualist culture. Because you think about during this pandemic, right? And the talk about the wearing of the masks and, socially distancing and lockdown, that's a collective idea. And you look at collectivist cultures like Japan and South Korea, they're so close to the epicenter of the virus that is China, right? And, they should be the hardest hit. And yet I think South Korea's had under 1,000 deaths from COVID, which is incredible. And, it's because they wear masks, they socially distance, they went into lockdown early, everyone follows the rules, everyone has there's a track and trace app. So everyone's willing to give up that little bit of freedom of the government knowing where you are, where you've been and things, not for the greater good of making sure that everyone else is safe and from this virus. Whereas in Americans, how many Karen videos have we seen of people refusing to wear masks because it infringes on their individual rights or whatever? So they're a lot more individualistic in that sense, whereas other cultures are a lot more collectivist and worry about the greater good.
Yeah, I think we need to be very careful before we continue slagging off any more of the certain culture. But it's not a culture to begin with. Americans, they are a load of people who came across from all over the world and settled down in America.
It's a mixture of cultures.
It's just a shit show, if you ask me. That I'm not saying that Brits are much better, but there is the royal family. There's somebody stand behind us. There's so many things that the Americans don't have. They've got the Statue of Liberty, and that's French.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
So there's don't get me wrong, we're not this is not a podcast to slate the Americans. This is the easiest comparison for us as Brits to compare to the Americans. So there's many ways that Americans are great at and the Brits are not so great at, or whatever word you want to put it at. But it's strange how the cultures, it's the Western world, so they shouldn't really be too far apart. So you look at, you said South Korea and Japan and all that. I don't think their cultures are too different from one another. They're, like you said, they're quite obedient. And this rings a bell for me with the Japanese football team when the World Cup was in Russia. And they were knocked out. I don't remember by who, but they were knocked out by someone in the knockout stages. And after the game, they went around the changing room, completely cleared out the whole changing room, like scrubbed it clean, and then wrote a note in Russian saying, "Thank you. This was a great tournament," or something like that. So the culture there, instead of trashing the changing room and leaving it to the cleaners to deal with, just kind of having that thought about everyone and everything. And I get that it's not always easy to think about, and it's not always the case to be able to accommodate for everyone. But when you are able to, those sort of cultures seem to do it a lot more. And I'm not including the Chinese because they've got a shady government, so fuck them.
Oh yeah. I'm with you on that. Fuck the government. Fuck the Chinese government. But you look at it in again comparing the UK and the US in terms of the actions of the policies that were implemented with lockdown, where we could have locked down earlier, and saved a lot more lives. So we're not perfect at all. We did a lot of things wrong, but the UK government was the first to introduce the furlough scheme, where the government pays companies payrolls in order to keep employees in jobs. I know it kept you in a job for a while, and it's helped save a lot of jobs. Of course, there's going to be a recession. There are going to be a lot more jobs lost, but it's not going to be anywhere near as bad as it is in America, where you've got 30 odd million people facing homelessness and things, because the government didn't take as strong an action as it could have done, because they believe in the individual, and they're not as a collectivist society. Whereas Brits, we definitely, there are some things that should be left to the individual, but there are some things that we take off the table, like, for example, education and healthcare. And as a society, we all agree that those are things that should be off the table and that should be paid for by government, whereas America doesn't. That's the clearest comparison that you can find between the two. Yeah.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. It's very difficult because we're talking about
A culture that we haven't lived in. Yeah.
yeah. So we can't really say. We can only assume what they think, because I'm sure there's loads of people who want certain things that we
For
have,
sure.
and there's a lot of things that we don't have that we would want from America. I can't think of any at the moment, and I'm sure that it will take me a few hours or a few days or a few weeks or a few months to think about them. But you just don't know. So
Good weather, that's one.
yeah, we've had good weather over the last few weeks. I'm right with
Very
that.
true.
So yeah, there's nothing that we would want from America.
So fuck you to our American audience. All three of you, we really appreciate you. Thank you.
Three. That's
Thank you.
three more than we would have in normal. Especially, will be three more after this. Three more after this podcast.
Exactly, because I'll put in the title, like, "Fuck you, our American audience."
That'll do well. Even YouTube will flag it and not even air it.
Exactly, that's perfectly fine by me, as long as as long as we can get it out eventually. But there's one more thing about British culture that I wanted to get to, and then we can cut it here. Is this idea of the tall poppy syndrome, where if you start at a certain level, right, and you've got all your mates that are at a certain level, then as you start to rise up above that, your mates will start to cut you down and bring you back down again to their level. So, for example, like when I started dressing a little bit differently and growing a beard and things, they started calling me homeless because I had a big beard. And you start getting slated a lot, and it comes back to what we were saying about taking the piss, which is fine up to a point, but that it reaches a point where it feels like people are trying to drag you back down to a certain level, because the the thought seems to be that people are trying to make sure you don't get above your level and don't become too arrogant, but they also seem to want to keep you there so that they don't feel bad about themselves also not moving up, if that makes sense.
So what's this theory called that you said?
Tall poppy syndrome.
I've never heard of it, but I'll
All
be
right.
very interested to know more about it. I think it's a very interesting discussion point.
Mm. So, well, basically the idea is that, say somebody's working class and he's got all his working classmates, and then he decides he wants to start to move up, and maybe he wants to go to university, whereas a lot of his mates get like working class jobs, so they become a plumber or an electrician, for example. And he's off at university doing his thing. His mates will take the piss out of him for being at university. They'll say, "Oh, what are you doing that for? You think you're better than us or whatever," and then they might try and drag him down. Now, I'm not working class, so I haven't experienced this myself, but I do know a guy who I went to university with, and he was from a working class background. He used to be an electrician himself, and he found himself constantly being dragged down by his family, who they were happy that he was at uni, but I think they thought, because I met them, I think they thought that they were worried that he was starting to think that he was better than them because he was at university and because he was looking to move into a better paid job, like an office job, as opposed to, a manual job where you're working with your hands and things like that. Whereas Americans seem to praise people who are moving up in the world and are looking to move up in the world. Whereas people in Britain will want to keep you down and at your level.
It's very strange. I mean, I'm not asking you to name that person. I think I
Yeah.
know who it is, but it's not. It's besides the point. It's very strange that that has happened. I would have thought families would have been like, "Do you know what? We never went to uni. We want you to
Mm.
do really good for you." So almost like support that person, because I've gone and met so many people that they were the first ones in their family to go to university, and
Mm.
their family couldn't be prouder, because they
Yeah.
brought up their child to go to university, and that was a great achievement for them. So
Mm.
uh,
Maybe
the
it's just a strange individual case.
it could be, but I definitely understand where you're coming from with the friends putting down, and almost like um, not letting someone fly, if that makes sense, just bringing
Mm.
their feet back down to their level, which is very, very weird, because I never thought of it that way. But it's one of those situations where, like you said, in America, they'll be more positive, and maybe that's where they are the land of opportunity, like they claim to be.
Mm.
So I don't know. I
Yeah.
don't know.
Actually, now that I think about it, I think the main thing that we seem to be concerned with is not being arrogant and also not thinking that you're better than someone else because somebody is working class or whatever. I think that's the underlying theme throughout British culture. Don't be arrogant and don't think you're better than me because of your job or your title or how much money you earn.
Okay. Yeah, I see what you're saying, but again, there's going to be some extreme cases where um, the Americans or whoever else is watching Downton Abbey is going to think that we live in castles and we drink tea, and whatever happens in Downton Abbey, I don't know. I don't watch it. I'm not
Mm.
um, middle or upper class, but it's it's just an extreme case where that would happen. So there's loads of people who want to treat everyone the same way as they treat everyone,
Yeah,
or as they're treated. Even the saying, before I complicate
yeah,
it even more. Um, but there's some people who just think that, oh, I have a big house and I have uh, a drive by garage or whatever you want to call it. I'm much better, so I'm gonna go and um, talk to someone who's an electrician and not gonna really care about them and just
mm,
gonna treat them as shit. So it really depends on the personality, but I do understand where you're coming from with this underlying kind of like, try and be as human as possible and try and stay with your feet on the ground, because just it's a horrible thing to do. So having that etiquette of being polite but still trying to do as much as you can kind of does that. I believe, if you're being
yeah.
kind and you're not being a twat to people, so you're not being arrogant, but also you're treating everyone the same way that you want to be treated.
But I think the key, just to finish on this, because I've got nothing else unless you do, is that if an upper class if a or slightly upper class person is a dick to the working class person in Britain, I think the working class person would be willing to push back on them and give them the finger and say, fuck you, don't be an arrogant cunt. More so. Whereas in America, it um, hmm, because of the conditions that they work in, right, where they earn shit money and they have to work multiple jobs just to be able to pay rent and things, because that's the reality for a lot of people in America. People have to take that on the chin, otherwise they're not in a job anymore, and their living situation could potentially be compromised. Whereas in the
I wouldn't
UK,
agree with that case.
okay,
Um, I think personally, having been in a situation where I couldn't talk back to someone who spoke and belittled
yeah,
me, it's a situation where, at the end of the day, I don't think it matters where you're from. It depends what sort of social economic background you have to go and be able to say to your superior, actually, don't speak to me that way, and then run the risk of being fired or whatnot. So
mm,
um, it doesn't, I mean, unless you live in New York or LA, rent and stuff like that in America is dead cheap in comparison to southern UK. So I don't think that's an excuse either to be able to have to work
true,
multiple jobs unless you live in a city centre, which is like London, and don't fucking live in a city centre if you have to work at multiple jobs at the end of the day.
mm,
So yeah, I don't think I can agree to that statement.
okay. Yeah, actually, now that you make that point, I'm like, what the fuck was that? Um, yeah, you make a lot of sense there.
But what I think what you're trying to say is we've got quite a lot of I don't know if you want to call them like human resources or rights, where people have a lot more legs to stand on than potentially other nations where they're a little bit more extreme, like China or like America,
mm,
where you kind of just have to get on with it.
mm,
But also, there is that kind of like, don't be arrogant when you get too high as well. So
mm, yeah,
it's quite level, I think, is what you're trying to say.
it levels itself out quite well in that sense. You can do well. We're a capitalist nation. You can obviously prosper if you work hard and you have marketable skills that are useful. But don't be a dick.
Yeah.
I literally think that. I literally think that that's it. Do well, but don't be a prick about it.
And that's the title, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes, yes. Do well, but don't be a prick about it. And on that note,
Thank
I
you for
think that's
listening.
yes. Thank you
Uh,
for listening.
it was a
And
bit of a stranger podcast, like the Fridays normally are. But
mm,
we'll be back on it on Monday for the stuff that, if anyone does ever listen to us, that's what we started this podcast for. So thanks for
yeah,
listening again,
exactly.
and catch you soon.
Yeah, see you soon, guys. Cheers.